Hi, welcome to today's webinar featuring George Watts, Chairman of Top Line Talent, and Laurie Blazek, President and CEO of Top Line Talent, and the authors of Becoming a Strategic Leader. This webinar is hosted by the American Psychological Association Publishing. We are offering a 15% discount on Becoming a Strategic Leader using promo code APA Books Web 15. This promo code and link to the book will be shared in the chat throughout the webinar. All questions posted in the chat and Q&A will be answered at the end of the webinar. The link to today's webinar, as well as the promo code, will be emailed to you in the next few days. Thank you and enjoy.
Are we? There we go.
Welcome, everyone. Okay, George and Laurie, take it away.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. There's a lot of places you could be at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and we're thankful that you're here with us today. Hopefully we'll give you an aha moment or two over the next hour and make it worth your while. I also want to thank the APA for putting this on, and thank you, Robin Lee, for setting this up, and thank you, Rose Sokol, and all the people that have come together that produced and published our book, Becoming a Strategic Leader, Capitalize on the Power of Your Personality. My name is George Watts, and I am the chairman of TLT Coaching. I'll introduce my boss, the CEO, in just a couple of minutes. I want to give a very brief background of myself and how I got into this business, and then we'll get right into the heart of what we're going to do today. I have a doctorate in counseling psychology. I never practiced counseling psychology. I went immediately into industry, and I was an assessment guy. I spent many years of my life doing executive assessments. And from there, I became EVP of 2 large global companies, and then became CEO of a public company that was later sold at a fairly good multiple. So I've had a lot of experience in the boardroom and leading large organizations, but I always kept one foot in APA. I'm a member of APA, and I'm a member of the Society for Psychologists in Leadership. I was president of their foundation board for many years. And so today we wanted to review our book just published by the APA and walk you through how to apply this knowledge in your situation on a personal level. As we go through, I want you to think about how to apply this information to you first and then to your organization. So why don't we go ahead and we'll get it rolling here. And you can also put in questions. We're going to do questions at the end of our presentation. Let's move on to the principles of TLT coaching. Our first slide, I wanted to go over a couple of core principles that over the years we've grown to understand. And this is the wisdom that we've accumulated over the years. As you know, wisdom is based on your own life experience. It's hard to get wisdom out of a book. So what are some of the core principles that are interwoven throughout our book? The core principle is adding strategic value through applying strengths. So we come from a strength psychology perspective, but just knowing your strengths isn't really worth very much. It's knowing how to add strategic value through applying those strengths. That's what separates the people who do exceptionally well, is the application and the adding of strategic value. What we mean by that is, how is the outcome different because you're in the room? How is the outcome more powerful because of your contribution? So when you think about your strength, and I want you to apply it to yourself, think about, how do I add strategic value to my situation? Another core principle that we have is don't change, grow. Become more of who you are when you're at your best. And I know everybody on our webinar today would agree with this statement. People don't like to change. And leaders don't like to change. If I told you, well, today's webinar is all about helping you to change, I'd probably lose 3/4 of you. But people do love to grow. They love to become who they are when they're at their best. And when you're at your best, you've overcome fear, you're able to think clearly, and you're able to think accurately. So part of our philosophy is we never ask anyone to change, but we do take them on the journey of growth. The third principle is overcome ego-driven shadow behaviors that derail careers. We do a lot of work with high potentials, and we take a lot of teams through our coaching program. And there's only 2 questions that leaders ask us, and it might come in different variations, but there's 2 core things that they want. Number 1, how do I get promoted? Number 2, what will derail me? So our program really centers around those 2 core concepts. That's what makes us a little different than a strength-based coaching program, that we do look at the shadow. And if you say shadow, that sounds like it came from Carl Jung. You're absolutely right. We stole this from Carl Jung. I think it was Picasso that said, good artists imitate, great artists steal. We just stole this concept because it's such an accurate way to understand what can derail people. As you know, the shadow is in the unconscious. The shadow manifests when the person is under stress and fear. Then that's when they project the shadow, and that's what derails leaders. And so we do pay particular attention, and every personality strength has its shadow, and we'll get into that today. And our 4th concept is the idea of collapsing time. Think back on your life. Think back 10 years. Are you smarter? Are you wiser? Are you more evolved and mature than you were 10 years ago? And the answer is, I hope so. I hope so. But the question is coaching. Can coaching collapse time? Can we develop your psychodynamic maturity in 4 or 5 months of coaching that it would normally take through trial and error 10 years, 12 years, 15 years to develop? So an important aspect of our coaching is the collapse of time. Adding strategic value. Don't change, grow. Overcome the shadow and collapse time. Those are our 4 building blocks of our program.
Okay, it's my bit now. Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Blazek. I'm president of TLT Coaching. And I also want to thank the APA and Robin for arranging this webinar. I am very excited to present this book to you. This is 10 years of our life work. And I was thinking back today when we were discussing, how to present this webinar about my own career and how I wish I had had a lot of this information when I was in my 20s. So it's part of my gift to be able to give this information to you through our book. And I just want to go through the first 4 parts, but just quickly about me. I am the non-psychologist on this call. I was a business professional. I spent 25 years in banking at JP Morgan and Citibank. After I left my banking career, I became a certified financial planner where I really honed my coaching ability. And now I work with George to coach leaders. My role in our coaching practice is to help them create their personal branding statements, which we'll get into in a little bit. And I also help people turn strengths into action, because it's not enough to know yourself well and understand your strengths. It's about taking action and to further your career and to leverage what you've learned about yourself through this program and through the book. So let me just go through this fairly quickly. There are 4 parts to the book, and our goal was to engage the reader in a guided introspection and in self-insight, and to have the material in this book kind of flow from chapter to chapter and build on itself. The first part of the book is called Your Personality. And in this section, we walk you through the process of understanding your specific strengths and shadows and the power of ego projection. And Also in this section, and I want to spend a minute or two on this, is our personal branding chapter. It's chapter 7. It's called Career Branding. We're not going to be able to spend too much time on this today, but what this is it helps you gain a granular understanding of yourself. And through that granular understanding, you create a personal branding statement. The rules around the branding statement are pretty simple. We try to stay at 7 words or less. You know, all we have is language to describe ourselves. So there may be a cognitive struggle, you know, to come up with those specific words and phrases that describe the essence of who you are. But that cognitive struggle is a good thing. And the feedback that we've gotten on this exercise, it has been surprising, but it's not. An extremely powerful exercise. It really is your branding statement really is an anchor for all of your career decisions. It's a confidence builder. And it's just powerful when you've created that perfect set of words that describes, how you're world class and what your superpower is. So a good example of this is we had a coachee. She's highly conscientious. She was very, very good at taking large volumes of data and reducing them into manageable chunks and data points in order to, accomplish a task. So her branding statement after working with her for a while was, I simplify the complex to deliver impactful solutions. And when she says this about herself, I mean, she's really describing, the essence of who she is. She's got it on her LinkedIn page. She's got it under her signature. And again, it's that confidence building that comes from knowing yourself and being able to use accurate language to describe yourself. So now in part 2, what we do is we move on from you individually and introduce you to our model, which George will talk about in a little bit. And we also address the importance of finding the right platform for your strengths. So, I'm sure that many of you can think back to a role that you've had that just wasn't a good fit, and you might not be able to articulate why that was. And that's an example of where your strengths are not aligned with the platform that you're operating on. So it's an important concept. It's one we're not going to spend a lot of time on here, but we do discuss it in detail in the book. The third part of this book now builds on the first 2 sections, and it's building blocks of strategic leadership. So here is where we address essential leadership skills and activities, like establishing emotional resonance with all different kinds of personalities, listening and presentation skills, how to influence or persuade people to buy into you and your ideas, effective email communication. So different building blocks that we have observed very strategic leaders using over time. And the last section here, I think, is really important because as leaders, you want to be effective coaches. So this part of the book focuses on what you've learned about your own leadership style, which is driven a lot by your personality types. And what you've learned about that and how you can be a more effective coach. So this section of the book talks about performance management, placing people in the right roles based on their strengths, building a winning culture, and driving positive team dynamics. So those are the 4 parts to the book. And so we're going to get into this now. I'm going to turn it over to George to talk a little bit about our interpretation of the Big 5.
A lot of people on this webinar are familiar with the Big 5, but some people are not. So I'm going to go over it very briefly. But even if you are familiar, stay with me, because we're going to introduce some conceptual frameworks that are new to you. The Big 5, and it's got a long history and a good history. We use it all the time. I consider myself a business person first, and I happen to have a doctorate in psychology second. But we use this model in coaching all the time. And I began to really value this model, and we've taken this model to another level in terms of why it exists. So I want to go over each of the components of the Big Five and the shadow to each of the strengths, and then turn it into a model. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. And this is in no particular order. And the Big Five was developed back in the 1930s by Gordon Allport, and they had a good idea. They said, well, if it describes human behavior, it should be in the dictionary. So they looked at the New Webster's Dictionary. They picked out 18,000 words and phrases that described human behavior. And over time, through factor analysis and over the decades, it was reduced to something extremely manageable and powerful. And that's the Big Five. And each personality structure and trait can be subsumed under one of these five. And these five are statistically independent of each other, or mostly statistically independent of each other. And nonetheless, they offer a kind of a meta look at personality structure. So we're going to take them in no particular order. There's no one personality trait that's any more important. And we're going to show how each personality trait can add strategic value. Let's take number one, open-minded. The open-minded personality structure, creative, imaginative, abstract, curious. These people like to think about the future. They like to talk about strategy. My number one trait is open-mindedness, and it's served me fairly well. Of course, there's some shadows to that open-mindedness as well. Scattered, unfocused, sometimes eccentric, sometimes too much of risk-taking. They kind of believe their own BS. I know I did earlier in my life. And they love to talk in terms of big picture and conceptual terms, but they forget what that means to the people around them. So the number one trait is open-minded.
And two examples of the open-minded personality are, one is Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, for sure.
I don't think anybody would question how successful they are. Would you like to work for them? But I'll talk about business models in a minute, but sometimes your business model is just so good that it negates some of the other factors that would derail you. The second personality trait is extroversion, again, from Carl Jung. But the extrovert is energized by people. They're performers, they're energetic, they're socially bold, they're assertive, and they love to go out and mingle. We were with a executive last night, a senior executive last night, and she was saying how tiring it is for her to have to go to all of these different conventions and meetings. And she's an introvert, but an extrovert would be energized by that interaction. So she needs to get her rest because she's behaving out of her comfort zone. Now, each of us has all five of these qualities in our psyche. And one of the beautiful things I love about this business is that the Big Five exist in every psyche all over the world, yet it's always manifested differently. So there's 7 billion ways it's manifested. And so it always is interesting and always is engaging to figure out how to move an executive forward using this platform. But the shadow of the extrovert, they can be poor listeners, they can be attention-seeking, they alter the mood easily, they can be impulsive. They're not particularly reflective. The extrovert generally does not engage in much meditation and reflective understanding and introspection.
So two examples of the extrovert, they don't have much in common, but both of these gentlemen feed off the energy of crowds, Donald Trump and Bill Clinton.
We're in Chicago and Trump was just here. I promised I wouldn't get political today. All right.
Okay, moving right along.
Moving right along. With that caveat, the third trait is the agreeable trait. And these are people that show a lot of emotional intelligence. Lori is an agreeable number one. She has twice emotional intelligence I'll ever have. But it is an extremely useful trait. It's great for empathy. We wrote an article that said strategy begins with empathy. And some of my colleagues actually are consultants that go out and teach emotional intelligence, and they generally are an agreeable personality that seems to be able to acquire that EI fairly easily. They can harmonize, they're team players, they're compassionate. The downside of the agreeable is they avoid conflict, they can't say no, they can be naive and manipulated. They have a high need to be liked. And so they'll subordinate their own interests for the interests of others. And some of the time, the agreeable leader can't deliver tough feedback. And as a former CEO, I can tell you sometimes the feedback has to be pretty tough. I've given and received some tough feedback, and the agreeable has to work on that and has to learn to deal with that aspect of their personality structure.
Right. And two examples of the agreeable personality are Oprah Winfrey and Taylor Swift. Very successful women, both in different ways.
So they sure are. The fourth personality trait is the conscientious. And these are thorough, dependable, organized, process-oriented people. People that really understand how conscientiousness are invaluable to an organization because they know how to get things done, they know efficiency, and they can design out processes. We work with Fortune 500 companies now. One of our clients has over 700,000 people working for the company, and they do deals of multi-billion-dollar deals where they'll have 4,000 or 5,000 people on a project. And you've never seen anything like a spreadsheet until you've seen all the different processes, the people, the man hours, all the different things that go into creating EBIT on spreadsheet. And it takes highly conscientious personality to understand how to put all that together. Now, the shadow to the conscientious personality, they can be rigid, they can be inflexible, they tend to be caution, they're perfectionistic. They can also be workaholics because they become so focused on what they're doing. Conscientiousness is always correlated with academic success, and there has to be a certain amount of conscientiousness in life, but they can be perfectionists and narrow-minded in their thinking.
Yeah, and we will often see that conscientious people have a hard time delegating for that reason. Two good examples of conscientious personality are Bill Gates and Hillary Clinton. You want something done, give it to Hillary.
Give it to Hillary Clinton. The fifth trait is the emotionally stable. Now, in a lot of in the Big Five literature, they'll say this is neurosis, but we put everything in a positive way, in a positive spin. So we've transferred it to emotional stability. So what is high emotional stability? That's rationality, objectivity, groundedness, steady, level-headed under pressure. When I was CEO of this fairly large public company, the first person I hired as my COO was my opposite. I didn't really understand our model then. I wish like Lori, I wish I would have understood this 20 years ago. I think might have turned out differently. But the person I hired was he was #1 in his class from the Air Force Academy, Rhodes Scholar, and Harvard MBA. He's pretty smart person. Really understood processes, but he used to fly and he would carry nuclear weapons. And as he said to me, if you're carrying nuclear weapons, emotional stability is a very good quality, and isn't it? My EVP of HR once came to me and said, people think that I'm emotionally guarded and I don't express myself very well. And as head of HR, people want a more emotional kind of person. And what she was just very, very strongly ES. She was very strong in her stability, and so it didn't manifest. So she didn't project those emotions, and it caused her some problems. So the shadows of the emotionally stable personality, they can be overly judgmental, they can be emotionally detached or appear emotionally detached, and sometimes they can be, especially under stress, they'll project that cynicism, sarcastic, and they can be condescending.
Yeah, examples of the emotionally stable personality type: Barack Obama, remember no drama Obama. Warren Buffett, who's been described as the most rational man in business. Now he is a #2 agreeable, which would help negate some of the shadows of being overly judgmental, because he wants to get along with people despite being high in emotional stability. And my personal favorite, and she is no longer with us, but Queen Elizabeth was the quintessential emotionally stable person, just stiff upper lip and completely unflappable. So I want to just mention that for us, we have discovered that, in helping coach people, it is your top 2 traits that are important here. The #1 trait is your natural orientation, but your #2 trait drives and influences how the #1 trait manifests. And I have a good example of that in myself and a friend of mine. We're both agreeable #1, okay, but my #2 trait is extrovert and her #2 trait is conscientious. So my career gravitated toward high-level business development in banking. And her career as an agreeable conscientious gravitated towards, she's a CPA, she was chief accounting officer for a public company, and she was very good at building teams, but also dissecting complex data and then being able to deliver that information to investors and stakeholders. So same top trait, second trait different, and really did influence how that number one trait manifested in business and in life. And just one more thing, if your number 3 ranked trait is close to your number 2, in my branding work with people, we look at that number 3 trait, because there are characteristics of that trait that may go into that soup of, how you manifest your superpower. So, if I was an agreeable extrovert and I had high ES, then I would be very good at going into situations probably that had, an unhappy customer. Okay. So it's important to rank yourself, really think about how those second and potentially third ranked traits might influence how that number 1 trait manifests.
And if you're following this at home, rank yourself right now. What is your number 1 trait, 2, 3, 4, and 5? And our model is you're only going to be world-class if you manifest your number 1 trait. And the number 2 trait is what activates it. And the big 5 is, there's an underlying dimension seem to have deep evolutionary roots. I want to come back to that. This is a structural part of the human psyche. And it's important to understand that all cultures and people have these 5 traits embedded within their psyches. Now, they manifest differently due to social circumstances and social environments, but the underlying trait is there. I want to go back a little bit to my career. I spent a lot of time in the venture capital industry. In fact, when I first began our company, we literally were officed with a large venture capital firm, and I selected CEOs and built sales teams. And I attended, of course, all the board meetings over a number of years. And in that world, you have a number of failures. And if you look at startups, up to 75% of startups fail. And so the question is, why do so many businesses fail? And we want to get into this because when Lori and I started working together, I began to ponder, why can't businesses be more successful? And is there an underlying strategy or an underlying model that if you understood, your business would be hugely successful? And so now we don't work much with the VC firms anymore because we're in leadership development. So we're working with a lot of very large Fortune 500 and a couple of smaller companies, a couple $100 million. So they're for real. And so what does it take to be successful in a startup? And what does it take to have a company that lasts over 100 years, the way some of our clients have? Well, we believe that there's 5 core constructs and 5 core dimensions that a company has to get right in order to stay in business. The first is innovation. You've got to go out into the market with a unique differentiator and a unique business model. I mentioned earlier, the older I get, the more I love business models, because a business model can take you a long ways. But when I was with the venture capital business, I always looked at companies to buy from 3 different perspectives. Number 1, what is their business model? Number 2, what niche were they in? Number 3, who were the people driving it? So it was always model, niche, and people to me. And a lot of companies may have some innovation because they have a unique business model, but they can't do number 2, which is present. You've got to present your offer in your ecosystem to as many potential buyers as possible. In other words, you've got to drive sales. If you don't drive sales, always drives business. Okay. And you've got to make presentations and make your offer to as many people in your ecosystem as possible. The third thing you have to do is, once you've sold something, you've got to partner, because everybody knows it's much easier to sell more stuff to a customer you already have than to gain a new customer. Gaining new customers is very expensive. Selling existing companies stuff that are already your customer is very, very profitable. That's where the real EBIT and that's where your margins occur. So you have to set up systems and processes to partner. The fourth thing you have to do to stay in business is deliver. You got to deliver on the promise. In the presentation phase, you make certain promises. Delivery is what is when the rubber meets the road. You have your organizational efficiencies, you've got your metrics, you've got your timelines, you've got your ability to deliver on the promise. And unless you deliver on that promise consistently, you're going to go out of business. And the fifth thing that you have to do to stay in business is assess. You've got to look at the metrics, you've got to look at EBIT, you've got to look at margins, you've got to look at all the different categories and how all those categories of services and products are doing. So you have to look at the metrics very, very carefully. And so once you look at the metrics, you find out if you're making any money or not, because sometimes you don't know until it's too late. As my brother, the chief financial officer, said a lot of companies are bankrupt, they just don't know it yet. And so you have to constantly assess the metrics. And once you assess those metrics, what do you have to do? Reinvent. So if you're going to stay in business for 100 years, or if you're going to start your own business, you've got to successfully do each one of these 5 phases. If you don't do them, you're going to go out of business or the business is going to suffer. Innovation, presentation, partnering, delivery, and assessment. You've got to do them all. So we began to look at this and began to think about businesses. And then lo and behold, drop the microphone. That's when we discovered that the big 5 is much, much more powerful than a personality model. It's, in fact, the most powerful economic model on earth. And what psychology has done is understand how business works. And if you're a consultant, I want you to look at this model. I want you to reflect on it. And I want you to think about yourself and think about your company. But let's look at this. The open mind is what? Innovation. That's what you do to differentiate yourself. The extrovert is the presentation. The agreeable is the emotionally intelligent that understands partner, the conscientious delivery, and the emotionally stable assess. And so this, the big 5, perfectly overlays with our 5 dimensions that Lori and I figured out on how companies stay in business. And when we sat back and looked at it, my jaw just kind of dropped. And I said, do you realize that psychologists are the most valuable person in the boardroom?
You would say that.
Yeah, well, that's what I believe. But we have an understanding of business that far exceeds any other consulting firm's perspective.
So
Everybody else.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, finish.
Well, I just want you to understand out there. I want you to look at this model and think about yourself for a minute. Where do you add strategic value in your ecosystem? What is your number 1 personality trait? That's where you're going to add your strategic value. Your number 5, partner. You want to bring your number 4 and 5 up to where they don't hurt your career, but you'll never be great by overcoming your weaknesses. You'll only be great by understanding how you add strategic value to your strengths and have the maturity to understand that. Like we say, in our leadership coaching, do you want to be the most mature person in the room or the smartest person in the room? Choose one, you can't be both. We want you to be the most mature person in the room. And that comes with understanding how you add strategic value and what you need to do to build out your team.
Yeah, and just to add on to this, when you look at this model, you can look at it from a micro point of view, which is where we help coach individuals. Okay, where does my brand fit? All right, where do my strengths lie? Which part of the transaction cycle am I naturally good at? And then how do I build out my team? So where may there be gaps? Where how do I build out the team with the talent that I have? Do I need to bring additional people in to complete this transaction cycle? And it's an incredibly useful tool because it's a visual image. So you can have a micro image of a project or a situation at work, but you can also have a macro view, which is a bigger picture perspective. And we're going to next talk about our definition of leadership, which leaders understand the big picture and they understand how to complete this cycle.
So we think a model is a visual representation of a system of ideas And again, I want to say that our proposition is that the Big Five is more than a personality model. We believe that when the traits and aligned in our transactional model provide the most powerful systems perspective of how business succeeds and stay in business. And we think psychologists have an important role to play in the boardroom. You can use this model for organizational development. You can use by going into an organization and see where the transactional system is breaking down. You can use it to select. You can develop behaviorally anchored interview questions to put the right person in the right role. So the model can be used in a number of different ways. But first, apply it to your own life and ask yourself, where do I add strategic value? Where do I fit in on this model? And where do I need to develop myself or develop partners to help me complete the transactional model? Look at it from a micro and from a macro perspective. Well, they say there's over 200 definitions of leadership here by 2 o'clock this afternoon. We're going to have 201. We think strategic leadership, orchestrate human potential into dynamic transactional systems. And that's what our model is a transactional system. So when we break down the definition of strategic leadership, we'll go through these very quickly. Orchestrate, continuously arranges or directs the 5 economic transactional phases. And when you move from a management mentality to a leadership mentality, management mentality is in one of these places on the star, but a true leader has to orchestrate the entire star. A true leader is at least partially responsible for profitability and making the company successful over the long run. So orchestrate the human potential. The dynamic is characterized by continuous productive focused energy. Dynamic is business, it changes every single day, so you have to constantly look at this from a dynamic lens. We consider business a transaction. You're transacting in your business ecosystem. That's business. So it's mutually rewarding and benefit economic event. It's a system. Our process is a system. It's a gestalt of interconnectedness, synthesis, and unity. So we offer a systems approach to define leadership and a systems approach to develop our coaching business. And with that, what I'd like to do is there's probably a couple of questions, and I don't know where those questions are, but we've got some time remaining. We'd like to answer any questions that you might have. We'd like to follow up on anything and clarify any misunderstanding or anything you'd like us to go a little bit deeper on. We've got some time here, but that's structurally the main part of our theory, is turning the Big Five into an economic transactional system and looking at the Big Five through a strength psychology lens, but also through a business transactional lens. How would we look at questions here?
Okay,
Well-
I will read the questions off. Candace asked, what about introvert leadership strengths?
Well, introverts, occasionally you have to get out of your comfort zone as an introvert, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that in saying, listen, I got to go out and act extrovert, extrovert, and then take some time, take that alone solitary time to recharge your batteries, because there's no doubt about it, you're out of your comfort zone, and that's okay. But realize what an introvert can do, and again, we'd have to look at you from a personality structural point of view. But I love introverts, and they can do some dynamic things. They have the ability to concentrate, and a lot of those introverts, if they have that strong ES, they're going to make accurate decisions. And there's nothing more important in business leadership than accurate decision making. So if you're an introvert, enjoy being an introvert. It's great. There's no problem. There's no perfect personality structure to be a leader. We work with all different kinds of leaders. The most important thing in leadership is psychodynamic maturity, because when you're psychodynamically mature, you've overcome fear. If you've overcome fear, you're going to think accurately. And if you think accurately, you're going to make accurate decisions.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to that. I think what I'm hearing George say is embrace your introversion. Look at what your number 2 ranked trait is and look at the fusion of those two. But what we are 100% confident in, and one of the things that drew me into leadership development when I was in banking as well, is that so much of the training that I had was case study oriented. Here's the case, here's how these people solved the problem, and you should be a leader just like these people. Okay, you should imitate their behavior and be more like them. And we don't believe in that at all. We believe that everyone has the capacity and the capability to be an outstanding leader, as long as they granularly understand themselves, how to overcome any deficiencies that they have by partnering with the right people, and then placing yourself on the right platform to leverage your strengths. So we wouldn't put an introvert in charge of sales, okay, but we might put an introvert that's an agreeable in charge of customer service, okay, because you're probably a very good listener and you're very good at partnering. So part of the journey, read the book and start to put the pieces together. But everyone on this call can be an amazing leader. Okay. You don't have to imitate Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, to reach for the stars.
And don't let anybody tell you that you need to be more extroverted. No, you don't. No,
Yeah.
you don't.
Yeah.
And that's what we mean when we say don't change, grow. Just grow into it. Never imitate others. Become who you are when you're at your best.
Yeah, I'm looking at another question here. Someone is talking about their top traits and then wanting to work on some of the other things. And we encourage that, okay? But remember, you're never going to be world-class trying to overcome your weaknesses. Bring those lower ranked traits up to where they don't hurt you, okay? And then make sure that your job content doesn't include a lot of activities that are involving those lowest ranked traits. Okay, because that will be, you may be able to do that work, but that will be exhausting for you and it's not going to be fulfilling and rewarding. Okay, so
as CEO, and again, I didn't have this model. I wish I would have. I did a lot of speaking and recruiting of top talent, and the COO ran the company. And it worked very well. We managed to sell it and actually make some money on this deal. So the important thing is to deepen your maturity. And remember, and I'm going to reiterate what Lori said, you're never going to be great overcoming your weaknesses. You're going to be great by manifesting your potential through your strengths. Bring those 4 and 5 rank up traits where they don't hurt you. Like, my conscientiousness is terrible, and I'm not that agreeable. I wish I was. If you asked me to drive a huge, complicated, multi-billion-dollar project, I would break out in hives. The first thing I would do is hire somebody highly conscientious, and I would go out and sell the concept while they actually perform the work. And I don't apologize for that, because I have my strengths that I bring to the table, but I need other strengths in order to manifest success for the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's another question about someone who works in a university setting. So they're not responsible for revenue, P&L. And so how does the model apply? How does all of this apply? Whether or not you're driving revenue or managing a project team or recruiting or whatever your role is, there is an application for this knowledge, because there are these micro transactions that are always going on, and they may not always be revenue based, okay, but you can step back and you can begin to put your role on a model and see where within the framework of the bigger picture you operate. And then how do you again, it's all about leveraging what makes you special. And if you're activating those strengths as much as possible during the day. So, it's a bit of an amorphous question, but I just wanted to address that.
And I'll say a lot of people need to do research and get publications in order to exist in that ecosystem. And look at your number one trait and start thinking about how you create research and ask research questions based upon your number one trait, because you're intuitively going to understand the research and you're going to understand how to apply the research. So look at your number one trait and start to think about taking your career to the next level, whether that's through research or through its academic leadership, through that number one trait. Anytime you can build your success platform using your number one, you're going to come out way ahead. Okay, you're not going to pay George Watts to go run a complicated IT project. Trust me, you're not. I could do it, but you'd fire me in the first 18 months. But I can look at the project and understand what I need in order to complete it. And you might want to partner with people internally, but always remember that the more you can manifest your number one trait in your job, the more success you're going to have, and the less stress you're going to be under. Because when you're operating your number 4 and 5 traits, you might be able to do it if you're smart, and university professors are generally pretty smart. But I tell you one thing, you're not going to have a good time. You're going to be under a lot of stress, and your health is going to break down over about 3 or 4 years. How about another question?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions about identifying your traits. Sometimes it's not all that easy. We go through a process in the book, and then what we do is we pair top traits together and give descriptions of them. So you should be able to see yourself in these descriptions. There are also some online Big 5 tests that you can take, but I'm pretty sure if you read the book and go through the first section and then look at the descriptors that we use in our branding, and identify how many of those descriptors feel like you, you should be able to rank yourself pretty easily. You know, some people have like top traits lumped together, 1, 2, and 3 are all pretty high, or some people, you know, have 2 very low ranked traits. It's that process of going through the cognitive struggle to figure out what it is, and then things will start to fall into place. We know that there are these other tools out there like Myers-Briggs, someone mentioned it here. The issue with Myers-Briggs and some of these other tools is they don't really tell you what to do with this information once you have it. And you know, George mentioned this when he first started speaking, that our goal is to help you activate your strengths, to take action. This is actionable information. So it's not just nice to know, it's we help, you know, guide you through a process of figuring out how to take action on what you're discovering about yourself.
I would also say, because sometimes people do have defense mechanisms, you can always take these Big 5 and ask your partner, some close friends to rank you, and kind of get other people's feedback. Do a little 360 on yourself using this model and say, would you rank me based upon your knowledge of me, and see how that lines up with your own assessment of yourself. I think that's another way to get some valid feedback.
Yeah, yeah. A couple other things. Will we be sharing our branding statements? Sure. I am an agreeable extrovert. I am, let's see, let me do George first. He's an inspiring presenter, and his branding statement is, I inspire people to believe in themselves. Okay. I am an agreeable extrovert, and I'm an empathetic energizer. And my branding statement is, I help people activate their strengths. That's what I do. There's a mention here about Elon Musk being an open-minded leader. Is a bit questionable. Remember this guy, he is super future focused. He is always thinking ahead. And because of that, that's a real clue as to his number one trait. You may be thinking about his shadows, okay, but look at the shadows of the open-minded personality, and you'll see some of them come out.
I had dinner with Elon, me and my 1,200 closest friends at the Economic Club of Chicago. He's open-minded. Okay, he's open-minded, conscientious, and he can be extremely, I think, challenging to work with. I'll just simply say that. But he's like Jobs in that sense. They're visionaries. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he's a genius. But the shadow is there and manifesting more and more, I might add.
Yeah, and I don't know if we can get, you know, because there's a lot of questions here, and I don't know that we're going to get to all of them, but I'm happy to go through and kind of answer some of these maybe in another forum. Let's see, to have an effective leadership team, does this require each Big 5 category personality trait? Well, this is interesting. Okay, so
That's
let's
a good question.
say,
I like that.
that's a great question. Let's just say you're leading the team and you're an agreeable conscientious. Okay. You know, you may not, and the team that you are leading is in a delivery capacity, and you're not innovating, okay, you may be innovating slightly within that delivery, looking for better ways to do things, but innovation may not be the highest priority for your little group. So, if you're an agreeable conscientious, and you're managing a team that is requiring those traits, you may not need all of those 5 personality traits to accomplish the goal.
I think it's a great question. And I'm going to say,
Yeah.
in the C-suite, my answer to that is yes. Each of these traits are critical in the economic transactional cycle. And so all of it, and it's nice to have everybody around the table representing each one of those traits in a sense. So think about organizations breaking down. They break down because they're not innovating, they're not selling, they're not keeping customers, they're not delivering on the promise, or they're not making money. Okay. And so as CEO, you want to cover each of those areas in your, certainly in your quarterly meetings at the very least. So I'm going to say, yeah, I think you need at the C-suite. I think Lori's very accurate. If you're in delivery, obviously you want a bunch of conscientious people. If you're driving sales, you want a bunch of extroverts. If you're driving account management, you want a bunch of emotionally intelligent people that can be the filament between the buyer and seller and reduce conflict. So it depends on the area that you're running within the organization.
And here's another question about introversion. Is it the same as emotional stability? I just want to reiterate how we think about this. Every strength has a shadow, and I think of it as on a continuum. Okay, so the goal of coaching and psychological maturity is to brighten the positive attributes of the strength and to lighten the shadow, okay, on that continuum. So the opposite of extroversion, or the shadow, the opposite of extroversion is introversion. Okay, it's a complete opposite of that. Emotional stability is a separate big 5 personality trait all on its own. And we go into a lot of detail in this book explaining each of the traits, how we see them, giving a lot of examples. And I think, if you read through that, it'll become clearer to you, the distinction between the different traits and the shadows and the strengths. You have anything you want to add to that, George?
No, we'll go ahead to another question.
Okay. How does the last slide relate to the previous 2 slides? If you're thinking about the leadership definition, remember, we define a strategic leader as someone who orchestrates the human potential to complete that transaction cycle. Okay, so that's how we define strategic leadership, as opposed to a tactical leader who is just looking at tactical steps and not taking the big picture into account. Would this structure help guide leadership for first responder leaders?
For first responder, what, for emergencies, that type of thing?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I can tell you one thing. The first responders, I want some people with a lot of emotional stability. Okay, so if you're going to be a first responder, I want you to be highly emotionally stable, because you're going to be parachuted into a highly stressful situation. I don't care how extroverted you are. I don't really care how open-minded you are.
Right.
I'd like you a little bit agreeable to do some coaching and some counseling there to calm everybody down. But I want you to have a strong ES component to your personality. I'm talking about the people parachuting. If I'm interpreting this question correctly, if I'm not, then I'm sorry. But if you're going to be a first responder, I want high emotional stability. That's what I would be looking for. So, because you want somebody to come in and immediately clamp down the situation from an emotional point of view and start making accurate, quick decisions. And boy, you just can't beat emotionally stable people for accuracy of decision.
Yeah.
I hope I've responded correctly. If I haven't, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I've got another one here about how handling someone whose top traits are opposite of yours. And this is a lot of the growth area that we see with the people that we coach, because they've got a difficult client Okay, remember, you're always, and George, I'd love for you to talk about this, ego projection. Okay, we're always unconsciously projecting our personality onto an interpersonal dynamic. And, it as an agreeable, especially, I would always personalize the fact that, somebody wasn't connecting with me, or they were being short with me, or they had a different style. And I was having trouble breaking through to them. And what we help people understand is that, you're projecting your personality onto an interpersonal situation where the other person may be the complete opposite of you. And so, this book gives you some tools and the knowledge to be able to manage that relationship in a more effective way, to use language that resonates with that person, to think about how to work with them from a different perspective, not just the knee-jerk, automatic perspective that you have that is a result of unconscious projection.
I'll just add to that excellent answer, Lori. This is what I mean by maturity. The more mature you are, the less you project. And so and that's why we say, do you want to be the smartest person in the room, or do you want to be the most mature person in the room? And we train our leaders to be the most mature person in the room. And what does that mean? That means they don't unconsciously project their personality structure onto the dynamic and then interpret the dynamic through that personality structure. One of the most powerful things you can do as a leader is to step back and realize the relevancy, or in certain cases, the irrelevancy of your own personality structure. And so once you recognize how you add strategic value, you're much more open. And I'll tell you something that Carl Jung once said. He said, just basically what he said. He said, the people that irritate us the most have the most to teach us. And I remember I used to get upset at the chief financial officer because he would present me with rational facts. I don't like rational facts as an open-minded guy. Okay, but I needed to hear rational facts in order to make some better business decisions. And I made some good ones, and I made some poor ones. But I can tell you one thing: the less you unconsciously project your personality, the more accurately you're going to see the dynamic. And that gets back to my core thesis. If you see the dynamic accurately, you're going to think accurately, and you're going to make more accurate decisions. And leaders ultimately get paid a lot of money to make accurate decisions. That's why they're there, supposedly. Yeah. There's nothing worse than a leader who projects their personality structure onto a dynamic.
Yeah, and
I assure
we've
you,
all
it will
worked
take
with
the
it.
company down.
We've all seen it. Okay, you know it when you see it. So, and what the Big Five model overlaid on the transactional cycle did for me is it gave me a toolbox. It gave me a vernacular. It gave me a information to understand what I was seeing. And that's information is valuable. It helps you make better decisions. And think more accurately. So
we'll take one more, then we'll wrap up.
yeah, I think I don't know, a lot on Big Five. Um, hmm. I think we've covered a lot of these. What I'll just say is feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn, connect with us. If you've got a question that we didn't answer, feel free to send it to us, and we're happy to get back to you.
And I'll just summarize by looking at our model from a micro and a macro perspective. If you're going to be successful, and we want you to be successful, understand how you add strategic value to your ecosystem. If you understand that and you apply that and you find the right platform, you're going to make a lot more money. You're going to have a lot more stickiness with the situation. And the purpose of business is to form sticky relationships, because those are the relationships that you can build on, you can build cash flow from, you can build predictability of that cash flow, and then that's how companies get valued, on the predictability of cash flow. So stickiness is good, and apply your strengths on a micro level, and then step back as a leader and understand how to orchestrate human potential into a dynamic transactional system. And if you look at business through this lens, we think it is far more powerful. There's a lot of consulting firms out there, from McKinsey to who knows up, and they don't know this model. and they come in with a strategy, and sometimes it's good strategy, but we have a understanding of business through the big five that quite frankly no other profession has. So I think there's a lot of room at the board and at the senior level for psychologists to apply this model and to apply the big five in making businesses successful.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody. Thanks to APA, thanks to Rose, thanks so much to everybody. And thank you for joining us today. And we hope you got at least one aha experience.
Thank you, everyone. George and Lori, I'm going to move you to backstage. And again, thanks for everyone to attending. And you will receive a follow-up email in the next few days.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.